In the glittering towers of Victoria Island, Lagos, where wealth flowed like the Niger River and ambition burned hotter than the equatorial sun, Kofi Asante sat motionless in his wheelchair, listening to the woman he loved plan his murder. The evening shadows stretched across his penthouse's marble floors as Adaora's voice drifted from the adjacent room, her words slicing through his heart like a machete through sugar cane. "Don't worry, baby," she whispered into her phone, her tone dripping with cruel satisfaction. "The fool can't even feel his own legs anymore. He just sits there all day like a broken doll." 3 months of this elaborate deception had revealed more about human nature than Kofi's 32 years of life combined. From his position near the floor-to-ceiling windows, he watched Lagos's neon lights twinkle below, while his fiancée discussed his demise with the casual indifference of someone ordering breakfast. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, one of Nigeria's youngest billionaires, more powerful in his supposed helplessness than he'd ever been while walking. But then, footsteps approached, and Adaora's voice transformed instantly into sickening sweetness. "Oh, darling, you're still by the window." Adaora appeared beside him, her perfectly manicured hand touching his shoulder with practiced affection. Behind her gentle smile lurked something predatory that made his skin crawl despite his inability to show it. "Let me get Asha to move you to bed. You must be exhausted." The transition was seamless, from plotting his death to playing the devoted caregiver in mere seconds. It was a performance worthy of Nollywood's finest actresses, except the stakes were his life and fortune. As she called for the housemaid, Kofi marveled at how completely he'd been fooled. For 2 years, he'd believed Adaora loved him for who he was beneath the wealth and success. Now he understood she'd been studying him like a general studies terrain before battle, learning his weaknesses, mapping his vulnerabilities, preparing for conquest. The realization that his money had made him a target rather than finding him love was more paralyzing than any spinal injury could ever be. But then came the sound of gentle footsteps, and everything changed. Asha Wanjiku entered with the quiet grace of morning mist over Mount Kenya, her presence immediately softening the room's tension. At 23, Asha possessed the kind of beauty that didn't announce itself with designer clothes or expensive makeup, but rather whispered through genuine kindness and eyes that had seen struggle without losing hope. Her hands, calloused from years of hard work, moved with careful precision as she approached his wheelchair. "Good evening, Mr. Asante," she said softly in her lilting Kenyan accent. "How are you feeling tonight?" There was no pity in her voice, no false cheerfulness that others used when speaking to him now. She addressed him as she always had, with respect and warmth that felt as natural as rainfall. Kofi had hired her just weeks before his accident, needing household help as his real estate empire expanded. She'd traveled from a small village outside Nairobi, working to support her widowed mother, who battled diabetes without proper medical care. What struck him most was how she never treated his condition as a tragedy or burden. While others spoke about him in whispers or avoided eye contact altogether, Asha continued sharing stories about her village, asking his opinions on books she was reading, discussing current events as if his mind remained as sharp as ever. "Asha, help him to his room," Adaora commanded, already turning away to answer another call. The dismissal was casual, thoughtless, the way one might address a piece of furniture. But Asha simply nodded, positioning herself behind his wheelchair with the same gentle efficiency she brought to everything. As they moved through the sprawling penthouse, past African art worth more than most people earned in lifetimes, Kofi found himself studying her reflection in the hallway mirrors. There was something profoundly peaceful about her presence, a quality that reminded him of his grandmother's weathered hands kneading dough in their small Ghanaian kitchen. "Would you like some tea before bed, sir?" she asked as they reached his bedroom. "I brought some chamomile from home. My mother always said it helps with healing." The offer was simple, genuine, free of ulterior motives. In his world of calculated friendships and strategic alliances, such unguarded kindness felt revolutionary. But then her phone buzzed with a message, and he caught a glimpse of worry crossing her features before she quickly tucked the device away. Everyone carried secrets in Lagos, even those who seemed most transparent. To understand how Kofi Asante, heir to nothing but dreams, had become trapped in his own elaborate deception, one must travel back to where it all began, a small farming village outside Accra, Ghana, where red earth meets endless sky and ambition is planted like seeds in the hearts of children who dare to imagine beyond their circumstances. Born to parents who died in a mining accident when he was 8, Kofi was raised by his grandmother, Nana Akosua, whose weathered hands taught him that character, like crops, grows strongest in difficult soil. Every morning before dawn, he helped her tend their small plot of cassava and plantain, learning lessons that would later save his life. "Kofi, my child," she would say while they worked, her voice carrying 70 years of wisdom. "Money will come and go like seasons. But character, that is what defines a man's true worth." She taught him that poverty shows you who you truly are, while wealth reveals who others really are. These words, spoken over morning fires and evening prayers, would echo in his mind decades later as he sat in a wheelchair worth more than his childhood home, discovering the devastating truth about human greed. By 16, Kofi had earned a scholarship to the University of Ghana, his grandmother's prayers, and his own determination opening doors that seemed permanently sealed to village boys. But education, he soon learned, was just the first step in a much longer journey. While classmates from wealthy families networked at expensive restaurants, Kofi studied in the library until closing time, understanding that brilliance would have to compensate for what connections could not provide. The opportunity that changed everything came during his final year, a chance to work construction in Lagos, Nigeria, where the oil boom was creating millionaires overnight like desert flowers after rain. His grandmother blessed his journey with tears in her eyes, pressing a small wooden cross into his palm. "Remember where you come from," she whispered, "but don't let it limit where you're going." He arrived in Lagos with nothing but ambition burning in his chest and her teachings carved into his soul. While other young men spent their earnings on flashy clothes and nightclub adventures, Kofi saved every naira, studying the real estate market during lunch breaks with the intensity of a scholar deciphering ancient texts. The miracle that transformed Kofi from construction worker to millionaire happened on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in 2018, when he overheard 2 oil executives discussing secret drilling rights over bottles of expensive whiskey at a bar near his work site. They spoke carelessly, assuming no one of importance was listening, a mistake that would cost them millions. Kofi learned that a major international oil company had quietly acquired exploration rights to an area where land remained incredibly cheap, overlooked by bigger developers who focused only on established neighborhoods. That night, he called his grandmother, explaining his plan to invest everything he'd saved over 7 years, nearly 2 million naira, into property purchases in that overlooked region. "Are you certain, my child?" she asked, her voice carrying across crackling phone lines. "Sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards," he replied, remembering her stories about farmers who planted during droughts and reaped the largest harvests. 6 months later, when the oil company's plans became public knowledge, his investment had grown 50-fold overnight. By his 25th birthday, Kofi Asante had become one of Lagos's youngest millionaires, but success brought challenges he never anticipated. Wealth, Kofi discovered, was like powerful cologne. It attracted everyone, but not always for the right reasons. Suddenly, beautiful women who had never noticed the quiet construction worker threw themselves at the handsome entrepreneur with desperate enthusiasm. Family members from Ghana appeared at his door with elaborate sob stories and outstretched hands, treating him like a personal bank rather than a nephew or cousin. Business partners promised him the world while secretly plotting to steal pieces of his growing empire, their smiles as fake as counterfeit currency. The loneliness was crushing, more isolating than poverty had ever been. At least when he was poor, he knew who genuinely cared about him versus those who simply tolerated his presence. Now, surrounded by luxury and admirers, he felt more alone than ever. How could he distinguish between authentic affection and calculated manipulation when everyone had something to gain from his friendship? The question haunted him through sleepless nights in his new penthouse, where success felt more like a prison than freedom. But then, at a charity gala in 2023, he met Adaora Okolie, and for the first time since his transformation, hope bloomed in his chest like morning glory, reaching toward sunlight. Adaora moved through the charity gala, like royalty acknowledging subjects, her elegant bearing commanding attention without demanding it. As the daughter of a prominent Lagos banker, she possessed the kind of sophisticated beauty that graced magazine covers and embassy receptions. More importantly, she came from established wealth herself, or so it appeared, which meant she didn't need his money. Their first conversation unfolded over champagne and soft jazz, her intelligence matching her beauty as they discussed everything from African literature to economic policy. "You're different from other Nigerian businessmen," she told him, her dark eyes sparkling with what seemed like genuine interest. "Most men your age are so arrogant about their success, but you still have humility." For 2 magical years, their relationship blossomed like hibiscus in favorable weather. Adaora introduced him to Lagos high society, while he shared stories of his humble beginnings, each seemingly loving both sides of him, the successful businessman and the village boy who still sent money home to his grandmother. She attended his business functions with grace, supported his charitable endeavors with enthusiasm, and spoke of their future together with apparent joy. But love, like quicksand, can be beautiful on the surface while hiding dangers beneath. March 15th, 2025, dawned like any other Lagos morning, hot, humid, and heavy with the promise of afternoon thunderstorms. Kofi was driving his silver Bentley through the city's notorious traffic, mentally reviewing presentations for an afternoon meeting, when fate intervened with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The truck ran the red light at full speed, its driver either drunk or distracted, slamming into the passenger side of Kofi's car with enough force to spin it across 3 lanes of traffic. The impact sent his luxury vehicle tumbling like a child's toy before crashing into a concrete barrier with a sound like the world breaking apart. He remembered the sensation of flying, the taste of blood, the strange silence that followed chaos. Then darkness claimed him for 3 days. When consciousness finally returned in Lagos University Teaching Hospital, he found himself surrounded by white-coated doctors, concerned nurses, and a tearful Adaora clutching his hand like a lifeline. "Thank God you're awake," she whispered, her makeup smeared with what appeared to be genuine tears. but Dr. Okafor's grave expression suggested their relief might be premature. The news he delivered changed everything Kofi thought he knew about his future. "Mr. Asante," Dr. Okafor explained with the careful precision of someone delivering life-altering news, "the impact caused severe trauma to your spinal cord. Our tests indicate significant damage to your L1 and L2 vertebrae." The medical terminology felt like a foreign language, but the implications were crystal clear. Kofi tried to move his legs, straining with all his willpower, but they remained motionless beneath the hospital blanket. Panic flooded through him as he attempted to wiggle his toes, flex his ankles, feel anything below his waist. Nothing responded to his desperate commands. "Am I paralyzed?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from the doctor's expression. "Spinal injuries can be unpredictable," Dr. Okafor replied diplomatically. "Some patients recover partial movement over time, while others—" He left the sentence unfinished, but its meaning hung in the air like smoke. Adaora squeezed his hand tighter, murmuring promises about standing by him no matter what, but her words felt distant and hollow. All he could think about was his grandmother's voice telling him that life's greatest challenges often came disguised as insurmountable obstacles. But then, 3 weeks into his hospital stay, something miraculous occurred that would change the course of everything. Late one night, alone in his private room while Adaora slept in a nearby chair, Kofi felt a strange tingling sensation in his right foot, like electricity awakening dormant circuits. Barely daring to breathe, he concentrated all his energy on moving his toes. Slowly, incredibly, they flexed. Over the next several hours, feeling gradually returned to both legs like morning light creeping across a darkened landscape. By dawn, he could move both feet and bend his knees, though significant weakness remained throughout his lower body. When Dr. Okafor arrived for morning rounds, his amazement was genuine and profound. "This is extraordinary," the neurologist admitted, studying new test results with wonder. "We've documented cases of spinal cord regeneration, but never this extensive or rapid. You should be walking normally within months." But as Kofi processed this incredible news, he overheard 2 nurses gossiping outside his door about something that made his blood freeze. Their whispered conversation revealed a truth more shocking than any medical miracle. His recovery might be the worst thing that could happen to him. The words they spoke changed everything he thought he knew about the woman sleeping beside his bed. "Did you see how his fiancée was acting yesterday when she thought he was unconscious?" One nurse whispered to another just outside his door. "On the phone with some man, talking about how convenient it would be if he never walked again." Their voices carried clearly through the thin hospital walls as they continued their gossip. "I heard her say something about power of attorney and inheritance. Made my skin crawl, honestly." The conversation faded as they moved down the corridor, but their words echoed in Kofi's mind like thunder rolling across mountains. That evening, when Adaora came for her usual visit, he studied her face with new eyes as she spoke about their future together. "Don't worry, my love," she said, stroking his forehead with apparent tenderness. "Even if you never walk again, I'll take care of you forever." That's what wives do. We stand by our husbands through sickness and health. But her eyes told a different story entirely. In them, he saw not love or devotion, but cold calculation, the look of someone planning something terrible while wearing a mask of caring. That night, alone with his thoughts and newfound mobility, Kofi made a decision that would test everything he thought he knew about human nature. Instead of revealing his miraculous recovery, Kofi chose to remain silent, pretending his paralysis continued while secretly planning the most important investigation of his life. His grandmother's words echoed in his memory like ancient wisdom. Wealth shows you who others truly are. It was time to discover exactly who Adaora, and everyone else in his circle, really was beneath their carefully constructed facades. The deception required enormous discipline and careful planning. He practiced subtle movements that suggested complete paralysis while secretly exercising his legs during private moments. Physical therapists worked with his unresponsive limbs while he fought every instinct to demonstrate his returning strength. Most challenging was controlling his facial expressions when Adaora revealed her true nature through careless words and cruel actions. Over the following weeks, as he maintained his elaborate charade, the mask began slipping from everyone around him. People spoke more freely in the presence of someone they believed was helpless, revealing thoughts and intentions they would never express to a healthy, powerful man. What he discovered about human greed and cruelty would have broken a weaker spirit. But it also revealed something beautiful that he'd almost overlooked entirely. 6 weeks after returning home from the hospital, Kofi's penthouse had been transformed into an accessible paradise that cost nearly £1,000,000. Ramps installed, doorways widened, bathrooms redesigned, all for a man who could walk perfectly well. But the financial cost paled compared to the emotional education he was receiving about the people closest to him. Each morning, Asha arrived with gentle efficiency, helping him with tasks he could easily perform himself while treating him with the same respect she'd always shown. Her kindness never felt performative or calculated. It flowed naturally like water finding its level. "How did you sleep, Mr. Asante?" she would ask while preparing his breakfast, genuinely listening to his response, rather than simply going through motions. She shared stories about her village while helping him eat, described books she was reading during breaks, asked his opinions about current events, as if his mind remained as sharp as ever. In a world where everyone else treated him as either a tragic figure or a financial opportunity, Asha continued seeing him as simply human. But it was the phone call he overheard late one night that revealed the true depth of her character and made him realize what real goodness looked like. Unable to sleep, Kofi had wheeled himself toward the kitchen for water when he heard Asha's voice coming from her small quarters near the servants' entrance. She was video calling someone on her phone, speaking in rapid Swahili through obvious tears. Though he didn't understand every word, the emotion in her voice was universal. Desperation mixed with love and determination. Later, he would learn she was speaking to her mother about mounting medical bills for diabetes treatment, promising to find money for insulin while refusing to ask him for financial help. "Mr. Asante has his own problems," she said in English during part of the conversation. "He's suffering so much already. I could never burden him with my troubles." The contrast was devastating. Here was a young woman struggling to save her mother's life, working for him with genuine care and compassion, while his own fiancée plotted his death for financial gain. Asha's integrity shone like starlight in the darkness of his situation, reminding him that authentic goodness still existed in a world that often seemed consumed by greed. But her problems also gave him an idea about how to test everyone's true motivations while helping someone who truly deserved it. But then came the morning that shattered any remaining illusions about Adaora's character. She swept into his bedroom wearing a designer dress that cost more than most Nigerians earned annually, her heels clicking against marble floors like a countdown to disaster. After dismissing Asha with a casual wave, she pulled up a chair beside his wheelchair, her smile bright, but her eyes cold as winter mornings. "I've been thinking about our wedding plans," she began, her voice carrying false sweetness. "Maybe we should postpone indefinitely. I mean, given your condition. The suggestion was delivered with practiced sympathy, but Kofi heard the calculation behind every word. She wanted access to his money without the commitment of marriage, power without responsibility, control without consequences. "But you said you wanted to take care of me forever," he replied, maintaining his role as the confused, vulnerable patient. "Of course I do, baby," she responded quickly. "But think practically. A wedding is such a celebration, and you can't even—" She gestured vaguely at his motionless legs. "Maybe it's better to wait until you're stronger." Translation: she wanted power of attorney without the binding legal obligations of marriage. Her phone buzzed with a text from someone saved as cheaty heart emoji, and everything became even clearer. "Excuse me for a moment, darling," Adeora said, stepping onto the balcony to take a call. But she didn't go far enough, and through the sliding glass door, Kofi could hear every damning word of her conversation. "No, he can't suspect anything," she whispered to her secret lover. "He's completely helpless now." "Yes," the lawyer said, "once I have medical power of attorney, we can make all his financial decisions." "What do you mean? What if he recovers?" "The doctor said that's impossible." Her voice carried the casual cruelty of someone discussing livestock rather than the man she claimed to love. When she returned, her smile was brighter than ever, as if discussing his future exploitation had energized her spirits. "That was just my sister asking about you," she lied effortlessly. "Everyone's so concerned about your recovery." Over the following days, a pattern emerged that made Kofi's stomach turn with revulsion. During daylight hours, when nurses or housekeepers were present, Adaora performed the role of devoted fiancé with Oscar-worthy skill. But in private moments, her mask slipped completely, revealing a creature capable of casual cruelty that would have shocked even his enemies. The transformation was so complete that he sometimes wondered if the loving woman he'd known had ever really existed. The cruelty began small, making jokes about his condition, complaining about how boring he'd become, expressing frustration that he couldn't attend social events that would advance her own status in Lagos society. "Sometimes I wonder if this is God's punishment," she said one evening while helping him into bed with theatrical reluctance. "Maybe you're being judged for something." Rich men who forget their humble origins often face divine retribution. The irony was devastating. Kofi had never forgotten his village roots. It was Adaora who had encouraged him to distance himself from his backward mentality and embrace the sophisticated lifestyle of Lagos elite. She'd insisted he hire professional managers for his charitable foundation instead of personally visiting the communities he supported, argued that sending money home to his grandmother made him look provincial to important business contacts. Now she used his supposed spiritual failings to justify his suffering, while positioning herself as his reluctant caregiver. But then came the discovery that shattered what remained of his faith in human decency. A betrayal so profound that it made Adaora's scheming seem almost innocent by comparison. One afternoon, while Adaora thought he was napping, Kofi overheard her in his study speaking quietly on the phone with someone she addressed as Uncle Kwame. The conversation made his blood freeze in his veins. "I need you to prepare the documents we discussed," she said in hushed tones. "Yes. Medical incompetence due to brain trauma. No, he won't suspect anything. Half the time he can barely complete a sentence." Uncle Kwame Ose had been Kofi's family lawyer for 8 years, handling everything from real estate acquisitions to his charitable foundation's legal structure. A distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, he'd been like a father figure, offering wisdom during difficult business decisions and celebrating Kofi's successes as if they were his own achievements. The man had sat at Kofi's dinner table countless times, shared meals and laughter, offered comfort during challenging periods. Now, apparently, this trusted advisor was conspiring with Adaora to have him declared mentally incompetent, stealing not just his wealth, but his very agency as a human being. The betrayal cut deeper than Adaora's scheming, because it represented the corruption of trust, the weaponizing of love against the person who had freely given it. But the worst revelation was yet to come. That evening, Adaora returned home with a guest, a tall, muscular man with the confident swagger of someone who had never known failure or consequence. "Kofi, darling," she said with false brightness, "I'd like you to meet my friend Chidi Okwu. He's going to help with some of your business affairs while you're recovering." Chidi's handshake was firm, his smile charming, but his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey. "Sorry to meet under these circumstances, brother," he said with practiced sympathy. "But don't worry. Adaora and I will make sure everything runs smoothly." The possessive way he looked at both Adaora and the apartment made Kofi's skin crawl, but he maintained his helpless facade while studying this new player in the elaborate game being played with his life. Over the following week, Chidi became a regular presence, arriving in expensive suits with briefcases full of documents requiring Kofi's signature for various urgent business matters. Each paper he signed transferred a little more control to people who wished him harm. But then came the night when Kofi witnessed something that crystallized his understanding of just how much danger he was truly in. Unable to sleep due to the weight of mounting revelations, Kofi had wheeled himself quietly toward the kitchen for water, when voices from the living room made him freeze behind a marble pillar. Peering carefully around the corner, he saw Adaora and Chidi locked in a passionate embrace on his own sofa, their hands exploring each other with the familiarity of longtime lovers. "Soon, baby?" Adaora whispered between kisses that should have been his. "Once the incompetence hearing is approved, everything will be ours. The offshore accounts, the real estate portfolio, the entire fortune." Chidi's response was muffled against her neck, but his next words were crystal clear. "What about him? Won't he become suspicious?" Adaora pulled back slightly, her beautiful face twisted into something ugly and cold. "Accidents happen to disabled people all the time," she replied with casual indifference, "especially ones who can't protect themselves. A fall down the stairs, choking on food, medication errors. So many possibilities." The way she discussed his murder, as casually as planning a dinner menu, sent chills through Kofi's entire body. These weren't empty threats or momentary fantasies. They were concrete plans being made by people who saw him as nothing more than an obstacle to their desires. As Kofi quietly wheeled back to his bedroom, his mind reeling from what he'd witnessed, he passed Asha's small quarters near the kitchen and saw her door slightly ajar. She sat on her narrow bed, video calling someone on her phone, tears streaming down her face as she spoke in Swahili. Though he couldn't understand most words, her distress was unmistakable. "Yes, Mama, I know the medical bills are high," she said, switching to English. "But I promise I'll find a way to pay for your insulin. Mr. Asante pays me well, and he's a good man, even though he's suffering so much." She wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself for her mother's sake. "No, Mama, I could never ask him for extra money. He has his own problems to deal with. We have to find another way." The contrast couldn't have been starker. While his fiancée and her lover plotted his death for financial gain, this young woman who barely knew him was struggling to save her mother's life while refusing to burden him with her troubles. Asha's integrity shone like a beacon in the darkness surrounding him, reminding him that authentic goodness still existed even in a world that seemed consumed by greed and betrayal. That night, lying in bed while pretending to sleep, Kofi made a decision that would change everything. He would turn the tables on those who thought him powerless, but he needed help from the one person in his house he could trust. The question was whether Asha would believe him when he revealed the truth, or if she would think his supposed brain trauma had made him delusional. The next morning, he took the first step in what would become the most elaborate counter-deception of his life. "Asha," he said, when she brought his breakfast, making sure they were completely alone. "I need to tell you something important, but you must promise to keep it secret." Her eyes widened with concern. "Of course, Mr. Asante." "What is it?" Taking a deep breath, he moved his foot deliberately beneath the blanket. Her gasp was audible as she realized what she was seeing. "You can move?" she whispered in amazement. "Not just move," he replied quietly, slowly flexing both legs. "I've been able to walk for months, but I've been pretending to be paralyzed to discover who I can really trust." The explanation took nearly an hour, during which Asha's expressions changed from shock to understanding to determination. When he finished, she sat quietly for a long moment before speaking words that would seal their partnership. "What do you need me to do?" Asha asked simply, her voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he'd revealed. Her immediate acceptance and willingness to help, without judgment or questions about his methods, confirmed what he'd begun to suspect about her character. Over the following weeks, she became his secret ally in gathering evidence against the conspirators. She discreetly photographed documents left carelessly around the apartment, recorded conversations when possible, and observed the behavior of everyone who visited. Her position as household staff made her nearly invisible to Adaora and her accomplices, who spoke freely in front of someone they considered beneath notice. Ms. Adaora was on the phone again today. She would report during their private moments. Something about moving money to accounts in Switzerland. Each piece of evidence built a clearer picture of the elaborate scheme to steal his fortune and potentially end his life. But as weeks passed, something unexpected began developing between Kofi and his unlikely partner in deception. Their shared secret created an intimacy that grew deeper with each whispered conversation and meaningful glance across crowded rooms. He found himself looking forward to their brief moments alone, cherishing her gentle laughter and wise observations about the world around them. 3 weeks later, the who's who of Lagos society gathered in the opulent ballroom of the 4 Points Hotel for what was billed as Kofi Asante's recovery celebration, an engagement party that Adaora had insisted on hosting despite his condition. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow reflections across marble floors as Nigeria's business elite, politicians, and socialites mingled beneath towering arrangements of white orchids and roses. The irony wasn't lost on Kofi that his own money was funding a party designed to celebrate his eventual demise. From his wheelchair positioned near the head table, he observed the elaborate theater unfolding around him. Adaora floated through the crowd in a stunning gold evening gown, accepting congratulations and sympathy in equal measure. "Oh, you're so brave," he heard her tell Mrs. Adebayo, wife of the Lagos state governor. "Supporting Kofi through this difficult time has been my greatest honor. Love means standing by someone when they need you most." The performance was flawless, worthy of international acclaim. To everyone watching, she appeared to be the perfect devoted fiancée, sacrificing her own happiness to care for her disabled partner. Several guests praised Kofi for finding such a wonderful woman, their words like salt in wounds they couldn't see. But then, as the evening's program began, the true purpose of the gathering became clear with devastating precision. Uncle Kwame Ose took the microphone, his distinguished presence commanding the room's complete attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with practiced gravitas, "we're here tonight to celebrate not just love, but also the remarkable strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity." The crowd murmured appreciatively as he launched into a speech about Kofi's business acumen and charitable works, but Kofi noticed how the lawyer's eyes kept drifting to Adaora, sharing subtle nods and meaningful glances. "However," Uncle Kwame continued, his tone growing more serious, "recent events have required us to make some difficult decisions about the future of Mr. Asante's business empire." Here it comes, Kofi thought, his muscles tensing despite his motionless appearance. Due to the extensive nature of his injuries and following comprehensive medical evaluations, the lawyer continued with false solemnity, it has become necessary to ensure that Kofi's affairs are managed by someone with the legal authority and intimate knowledge of his wishes. The implication was crystal clear. They were claiming he lacked the mental capacity to make his own decisions, setting the stage for a complete takeover of his life and fortune. Uncle Kwame gestured toward Adora, who rose from her seat with what appeared to be reluctant grace, her expression perfectly calibrated to suggest humble acceptance of a heavy burden. "Therefore, effective immediately," he announced to the gathered crowd, "Ms. Adaora Okolie will assume power of attorney over all of Mr. Asante's business and personal affairs. This decision has been made in consultation with his medical team and represents what we believe to be his own wishes, were he able to express them clearly." The applause that followed felt like nails on a chalkboard, 300 of Lagos's most influential people celebrating what they believed was a touching act of devotion, but was actually the legalization of theft and potential murder. But then, just as Adaora approached the microphone to make her acceptance speech, a commotion erupted near the ballroom entrance that would change everything. Kofi turned to see Asha pushing through the crowd, her face flushed with urgency and something that looked like righteous anger. She wasn't supposed to be here. Staff members didn't attend social functions of this caliber. But somehow, she'd managed to slip past security, and the expression on her face suggested she had something important to say. "Mr. Asante?" Asha whispered urgently as she reached his wheelchair, her voice cutting through the crowd's chatter. "I need to tell you something important. I found papers in Ms. Adaora's room, documents about offshore accounts and property transfers." Her presence at the elegant gathering was so unexpected that conversations began stopping around them, guests craning their necks to see what was happening. "What is that girl doing here?" Adaora's voice cut sharply across the ballroom as she spotted Asha, her carefully maintained composure cracking for the first time all evening. "Security, please escort the help back where she belongs. This is a private function." But Kofi had heard enough. 3 months of careful planning and evidence gathering had led to this moment. All the pieces were in place, all the players were present, and all the proof he needed was documented and ready. It was time to reveal the truth in the most dramatic way possible, ensuring that everyone who had come to celebrate his downfall would instead witness justice being served with the kind of spectacle that Lagos society would never forget. "Wait," Kofi said, his voice stronger and clearer than it had been since the accident, cutting through the ballroom's confused murmur like a blade through silk. The entire gathering fell silent, 300 guests suddenly frozen as they processed what they were hearing. For months, Kofi's speech had been halting and confused, barely coherent at times. Now he sounded completely lucid, mentally sharp, and unmistakably in control. "I said wait," he repeated, slowly placing his hands on the armrests of his wheelchair, while every eye in the room focused on him with laser intensity. Adaora's face went pale as realization dawned. Uncle Kwame dropped his champagne glass with a crystal crash that echoed through the silence, and somewhere near the bar, Chidi began looking frantically for the nearest exit. And then, in front of 300 of Lagos's most influential people, Kofi Asante stood up. The transformation was so dramatic, so impossible given what everyone believed about his condition, that several guests began applauding spontaneously, thinking they were witnessing a miraculous recovery. But the expressions on Adaora's, Uncle Kwame's, and Chidi's faces told a completely different story. One of shock, terror, and the dawning realization that their carefully orchestrated plans were crumbling like sandcastles before an incoming tide. Kofi took one steady step, then another, walking with confident grace toward the microphone that had just been used to steal his life. The crowd's applause grew uncertain, then died away entirely as they began to understand that something far more complex than a medical miracle was unfolding before their eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kofi said, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system with the authority of a man reclaiming his power. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight to witness what you believed was a celebration of love and devotion. But I'm afraid this gathering isn't quite what it appears to be." He gestured toward a side door with theatrical precision, and suddenly the ballroom filled with an unexpected group of guests, uniformed police officers led by Detective Inspector Funmi Adebayo of the Lagos State Police Financial Crimes Unit, their presence transforming the elegant social gathering into something that resembled a crime scene. "You see," Kofi continued with calm satisfaction, "for the past 3 months, I have been conducting an undercover investigation into financial fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, and attempted murder. Thanks to the evidence gathered during this time, including recorded conversations, forged documents, and witness testimony, we now have everything needed to ensure that justice is served." The ballroom erupted in chaos as guests pulled out their phones, some recording the drama, while others frantically called friends and family to share the incredible scene unfolding before them. This was the kind of scandal that would dominate Lagos society conversations for years to come. Adaora tried to run, her designer heels clicking frantically against marble floors, but her path was blocked by uniformed officers who had positioned themselves strategically throughout the ballroom. "This is insane!" she screamed, her composure completely shattered, the elegant facade replaced by raw desperation. "He's having some kind of mental breakdown. Look at him. He's been paralyzed for months. Everyone here can testify to that." But Dr. Okafor's voice rang out from the crowd as the neurologist stepped forward, his presence lending medical authority to the extraordinary revelations. "Actually," he announced clearly, "Mr. Asante contacted me 6 weeks ago to reveal that he had regained full mobility within days of his accident. What followed was an elaborate and completely legal investigation into suspected criminal activity." The doctor's words hit the conspirators like physical blows, confirming their worst fears about how thoroughly they'd been outmaneuvered. Uncle Kwame pulled out his phone frantically, dialing numbers with shaking fingers, while sweat beaded on his distinguished forehead. "This is all a misunderstanding," he called out desperately to anyone who would listen. "Kofi, son, your brain injury is making you confused. Let me call Dr. Martins to help clarify the situation." But his escape attempt was about to be crushed with surgical precision. "Dr. Martins doesn't exist," Kofi replied with devastating calm, his words carrying across the silent ballroom like thunder rolling across mountains. "Just like the medical reports you've been forging, the competency evaluation you scheduled for next week, and the power of attorney documents that were never legally valid." Detective Inspector Adebayo stepped forward with a thick folder full of evidence, her professional demeanor adding weight to the unfolding drama. "Mr. Kwame Ose," she announced clearly, "you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit theft, and abuse of legal authority. You have the right to remain silent, though I suspect you'll want to cooperate fully, given the overwhelming evidence against you." As handcuffs clicked around Uncle Kwame's wrists, the distinguished lawyer's mask of respectability crumbled completely, revealing the desperate criminal beneath. Adaora's composure finally shattered like glass hitting concrete. "You bastard!" she shrieked at Kofi, her voice raw with fury and defeat. "Do you have any idea what I sacrificed for you? I could have married anyone. Politicians, oil executives, men with real power. But I chose you because I thought you were different, thought you were special." Her words dripped with venom and wounded pride, the beautiful mask finally discarded to reveal the predator underneath. "You're absolutely right," Kofi replied quietly, his voice carrying a sadness that was more devastating than anger could ever be. "I am different. I'm not the helpless fool you thought you could manipulate and murder for financial gain." But then, Chidi made his desperate play, shoving through the crowd toward the ballroom's back exit like a cornered animal fleeing hunters. Unfortunately for him, Asha had positioned herself near that very door, and as he tried to push past her with desperate force, she calmly stuck out her foot. Chidi went down hard, his expensive suit tearing as he slid across the marble floor with all the grace of a fallen dictator. Before he could scramble to his feet, 2 officers had him in custody, ending his escape attempt as quickly as it had begun. "Mr. Chidi Okwu," Detective Inspector Adebayo announced with professional satisfaction, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, attempted theft of assets exceeding 50 million naira, and criminal conspiracy." As the 3 conspirators were led away in handcuffs, their carefully planned scheme destroyed, and their futures reduced to prison sentences, the ballroom erupted in the kind of chaos that Lagos society lived for. A scandal so dramatic that it would be retold at dinner parties for decades to come. 6 months later, as Lagos slowly moved on to new scandals and fresh gossip, the legal proceedings had concluded with sentences that satisfied both justice and public appetite for accountability. Adaora received 15 years for fraud and attempted murder. Uncle Kwame faced 20 years and permanent disbarment for his betrayal of legal ethics, while Chidi's role as would-be assassin earned him 25 years behind bars. But the real transformation had been in Kofi himself, who discovered that true wealth wasn't measured in naira or real estate holdings, but in the quality of people who chose to stand beside you when the world seemed darkest. On a quiet Sunday morning, he found Asha tending her small herb garden on the penthouse balcony, cilantro and mint growing in neat rows like hope taking root in unexpected places. "Your mother's treatment is going well?" he asked, settling beside her in the morning sunshine. Her smile lit up like sunrise over Mount Kenya. "She's doing wonderfully, thanks to the anonymous donor who covered all her medical expenses," she replied, though they both knew the donor's identity perfectly well. As they sat together watching Lagos wake up below them, Kofi reflected on his grandmother's wisdom about wealth revealing people's true nature. It had shown him Adaora's greed, Uncle Kwame's corruption, and Chidi's violence. But it had also revealed Asha's genuine kindness, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures come not from what you accumulate, but from recognizing the authentic love that finds you when you need it most. Sometimes the most valuable treasures come disguised as ordinary blessings, and the richest inheritance isn't what you leave behind, but the love you choose to embrace while you're still here to feel its warmth. If this story of care, love, deception, betrayal, and redemption touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to remember that true love still exists in our complicated world. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate the triumph of authentic hearts over false ambitions. And remember, sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what was always worth keeping.